So it is a great pleasure to have David Parks to be our next keynote speaker. And David Parks is a professor of computer science at Harvard University and also co-director of the Harvard Data Science Center, Data Science Initiative. And his research interests evolve around artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is pretty typical for a computer science professor. But what is less typical is that he is also very much active and embedded in economic theory, microeconomic theory. With this combination of expertise, his large body of work has made a significant contribution to the field of electronic commerce. And I was very excited to learn, a couple of years ago that he picked up interest in blockchain, because I think that now, again, with this combination of expertise, this really fruitful, and I expect that we are going to see similar contribution into the blockchain field. So thank you very much, David, and please take it away. Do let us know, how do you want to take the questions? Do you want me to defer the questions to the end, or do you want to take them throughout the talk?
How about if they're clarification, we can take them through, and otherwise we'll defer until the end, and I'll try to save time at the end. Sounds good. Yeah, okay. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's really great to be here with you all. Nice to see some old friends. This is work that is joined with Matheus Ferreira, Daniel Moroz, and Mitchell Stern. And it's work on thinking about how to design the blockchain transaction fee market. And I completely align myself with your comments, Hannah. I think what I'm finding so interesting about this space is it's so vibrant. There are so many interesting research questions. I think there's a lot that we can be doing as a field. Great. So, how do I frame this? I'm really excited mainly about blockchain technologies because I think about it as economically mediated computation. We have a distributed computer, and we have what has tended to be what you can think about as a very unruly auction to manage the congestion into that computer. And it's traditionally been first price-esque. And it looks like this is beginning to change a little bit. And that's what I wanted to talk about this afternoon with all of you. Let's look at the utilization of Ethereum over time. The utilizations on the y-axis going up to 100%. You can see the congestion in the shared computer over time. You can also see the effects of something that we'll talk about that happened early August of this year. You can also look at the transaction fees. This is looking at the transaction fees over the past year. This is the average transaction fee to have a transaction accepted into the chain. And you can see that there's a lot of volatility. There was in particular this period where transaction fees were extremely volatile. And you can see that things have been, I'd say, relatively more stable recently. So I'm here to talk about market design for this transaction fee auction. This kind of question as to how should we build economic systems to allow transactions onto this shared computer. And one property that I will be talking about is incentive compatibility for the miner. One unique aspect of market design for blockchain is that the miner plays the role of the auctioneer and has considerably more flexibility in terms of what the miner chooses to do with regard to bids and which bids are winners than we would typically imagine in an auction design problem. So certainly the miner playing the role of the auctioneer does need to respect on-chain logic as to which bids win. If we have a rule that says that a bid has to be above a particular price, then the miner is not able to include transactions with bids that are below that price. But other than that, the miner has considerable flexibility to choose the winners of the auction. The miner can also create undetectable fake bids that are maybe making payments to the miner or an entity controlled by the miner. Others have also pointed out that there are challenges where miners can potentially reach off-chain agreements as well with the bidders in the economy. And this is why I use the phrase unruly first price auction. It's not that the highest bids win, it's that the auctioneer gets to decide which bids to take in that design. The second aspect that makes transaction fee market design interesting is that in comparison to us not really being able to precisely design the auction rule, and just to say another word about that, that's because there are bids in the mempool that will not make their way onto the chain, and therefore there's only limited control we have over how to design the allocation rule. The payment rule can be designed. Because it's provided through the consensus protocol, making it less unruly, but it can only use on-chain data, of course. So this is the OC property, that the payment rule should only be using on-chain data. Users of a blockchain are strategic, and we would prefer simplicity. We would love it if we can design a market that is strategy-proof. So you can bid your true value as your willingness to pay. And we would like price stability, because users may also have some degree of patience and be willing to wait for their transaction to make its way onto the blockchain. And lastly, we'd like welfare. We'd like the capacity, the limited capacity to be allocated to maximize total value. So four properties that I would like to highlight of the transaction fee market design problem. And just as an aside, to make sure that you're all with me, we're in the same place, let's talk briefly about first price designs and second price designs. To recall the four properties I described, the first price auction has been the de facto standard. It satisfies IC miner, it satisfies on-chain computation, but it fails incentive compatibility in regard to the user, because the user needs to try to figure out how much they should be bidding onto the chain. It's therefore also hard to provide welfare guarantees. And I'm just putting an asterisk here against incentive compatibility for the miner, because all the way through this talk, I'm leaving to one side miners that are trying to do MEV, extractable value style behaviors. I'm going to think about those as content-based behaviors. I'm leaving that to one side. Talking about a miner who's just looking to run the market in a way to make money from fees. So that's the first price auction. A second price auction would satisfy incentive compatibility for users. It would provide a welfare guarantee, but it would fail to be incentive compatible for a miner, because a miner could introduce a fake bid to drive up the second price. And moreover, it fails this on-chain computation property, because the losing bids do not make their way onto the chain. As another aside, some interesting background from economic theory, Bapor and Lee, and then there's been some subsequent work within computer science, including by my co-author, Matheus Ferreira and his collaborators. There's this nice work on what's called a credible auction. An auction is credible if, even though an auctioneer can choose to use any safe deviation from the rules of the auction, where safe deviation means a deviation that cannot be detected by bidders, even though that's possible, the auctioneer cannot gain revenue by doing so. This is how Mohammed and Shenwu chose to define this notion of credibility. The point being that maybe it's a safe deviation because it can be made to look legal to each individual participant by misrepresenting what the other participants could have said. As an example, you can see kind of the mapping to what I've been talking about. Second price auction is not credible because the auctioneer could exaggerate the second highest bid. And based on the knowledge you have, you wouldn't know that that is impossible. On the other hand, the first price auction is credible because the winner knows how much they bid. And what Bapor and Lee prove is they prove that ascending price auctions are unique, revenue optimal, credible, and strategy proof. So that sounds very nice, and it is a very nice result. But I mention this as an aside because this result is not applicable here. It's not applicable here because the way the credible auction design model is established is it considers deviations from a game form, from the message passing in a game form. It doesn't consider deviations to a completely different set of rules. And the auctioneers here, the miners, have considerably more power than is anticipated in the credible auction design theory. So you might say, well, okay, but why could I not just implement the ascending price auction on chain? Well, it's too costly. Even if you could find a way to get all of the bids corresponding to transactions onto chain, that's too costly. We don't want all that data to be written on chain. Okay, so what am I here to talk about? Well, we might ask, what about posted prices? That would be incentive aligned for the miner, incentive aligned for the user, trivially on-chain computable because we just fix the price once and leave it. But of course, it would not provide welfare because we know that a challenge in blockchain fee markets is the user demand is highly volatile. So, okay, what are we going to do instead? Well, let's think about using dynamic posted prices. And we can think about a market now that is dynamically adjusting the price. This would be incentive compatible for users. The price adjustment needs to be done in a way that is on-chain computable. And the question is, and the main question that we think about in this work is, can this be done in a way that will also satisfy incentive compatibility for a miner and promote welfare? And just think for a moment that a possible concern is that if the pricing is being adapted based on-chain information, which after all is the only information that the pricing rule would be able to access, then maybe a miner can usefully manipulate that adaptation over time. It's a potential concern that you might have. And if you think, well, miners participate once and then go away and they don't know when they're going to come back, first of all, you might think that if all things are equal, but they can do something that would improve the future under the possibility they'll come back, then why wouldn't they do it? And secondly, we know that there is evidence of collusion between miners. So miner-miner collusion could also lead to some manipulation of the adaptive pricing rule. This is the research question that we're interested in. Now, I'm sure in all of your minds at this point is EIP 1599, proposed in 2019, implemented in August of this year, known as the London hard fork, described as an automated bidding system using dynamic pricing, dynamic posted prices designed to support simplified bidding, described by Vitalik as very important for the future of Ether. Described by others as, how will it affect people? Will it pump up the price? This has created lots and lots of noise online, lots and lots of discussions. This user says, I think this is the dumbest move. Okay, they're talking about proof of work and proof of stake at the same time. The most goofy move in crypto history. Now, of course, this person's trying to get attention to this other coin, and lots and lots of discussion about how much ETH is being burned due to EIP 1559. So what is it? What's EIP 1599, and how does it relate to what I'm here to talk about?
So David, so, it is actually 1559.
Yeah,
you're saying it right. Yeah,
it was right the first time. EIP 1559. How does it relate to what I'm here to talk about? So each block contains a posted price. Let's call that Q sub T. The bids now are a tip and a cap. The miner can only include transactions with a cap above the posted price. Think about the cap as the maximum that the bidder will ever pay. The bidder will pay if their transaction is included, posted price plus the tip, as long as that is below their cap. The miner receives the tip, and the price Q sub T is then burned. And then compute the next posted price QT plus 1 based only on utilization information in the previous block. EIP 1559. So this is a hybrid design. I think you can all immediately see this. It's a first price design when the current posted price is too low, and therefore demand at that price is above capacity. And therefore the bids that are taken are the ones we would expect. We would expect the miner to somehow be motivated by taking the bids with the higher tips. So there's a first price aspect to it. But then it also has a posted price flavor when QT is high enough such that the demand is below the capacity. Clearly we can state, it's not maybe obvious that it's incentive compatible for the miner, but that can be established. Again, in a sense that I'll make a little bit more precise and leaving aside some manipulations. It's on-chain computable, but because it sometimes reduces to a first price auction, it's not incentive aligned for the user always. We do argue a corollary of our results is that you could get a welfare claim for the adjustment rule of EIP 1559. We make an argument for a utilization-based adjustment rule. This should say utilization-based rather than utility-based. Just a comment on burning and why there is burning in the rule. One big reason is this precludes off-chain first price auction style agreements. This has been discussed in a working paper by Tim Roughgarden, and it's been followed up recently with a paper by Cheng and Shi. I showed you this. Here's the effect that switching on the rule had as of August of this year. Utilization dropped to 50%. That is the target utilization of the price adjustment rule. And, I guess we'll know over time, but maybe it looks more stable than it did here. It's probably too early to really know what's happening there. I did want to share with you the effects of the burning that is happening of these transaction fees and kind of compare that to the block rewards, because there's a side conversation happening about whether this is also providing new useful deflationary pressure on Ethereum as well. And you can see, interestingly, that things are balancing out at the moment. I'm not quite sure if anybody has any theory to say why that would be, but it does seem to be happening at the moment. Okay, so to summarize the EIP 1559 rule, each block contains a posted price, Q sub t. The bids are tips and caps. Miners can only include transactions with a cap above the price, but have flexibility beyond that. The bidder pays the price and the tip. Miner gets the tip, the price is burned, and then you compute the price for the next block based on utilization. So how is what we're proposing in this paper different, and how is it the same? And in most ways, it's actually a simpler design than the new Ethereum design. Each block will contain a posted price. Now there are just bids. We don't have tips and caps. We just have bids. Miners can only include transactions with a bid above the price. The price goes to the miner. And one way in which I'm highlighting here all the ways in which we deviate, but one way in which we deviate is that the next price is based on not just the utilization of the previous block, but also the bids in the last block. I'll get back to the asterisk in a second. The properties we establish are the two IC properties, the OC property, the welfare property. Most of the work is in establishing the welfare property. And just as a comment, we don't analyze this yet in the current version of the paper, but just as burning is present in the new Ethereum rule, it seems that we could do some analysis here to also introduce that to this rule, presumably to the same effect of making fake bids more costly and reducing the benefit of being able to collude between a bidder and a miner. So a little bit more formally, we have an intended allocation rule. This is that we intend for the miner to pick a random subset of the bids that are above the current price. Just a comment, we only need private randomization here, so we don't need the type of costly public randomization that is being worked on. The next price, we increase it multiplicatively when there is over-demand, and we decrease it according to the prices of the accepted bids when there is under-demand. And I'll explain that asymmetry as we keep talking here. Let me formalize a little bit more what I mean by incentive compatibility for miner and incentive compatibility for user. So incentive compatibility for miner, no other set of winners provides more revenue, even considering fake bids. And for decisions where there are ties, maybe there are multiple sets of winners that can provide the same revenue, then amongst those ties, there's no way to affect the future price. So first of all, you care myopically as a miner about the revenue you're getting now. Given that there may be ties, and notice that we're asking the miner to pick a random subset of the bids above the current price. So indeed, if there is over demand, then there are ties. In that case, we would prefer the miner to have no way to affect the dynamics. And that's precisely why the rule has this asymmetry, which is that we multiplicatively increase the price when there is overdemand without paying attention to the value of the bids that are placed into the block, which the miner would be able to control. But we feel willing to pay attention to the bids when there is underdemand. Because in that case, if the miner was to manipulate the bids that are accepted, it's costing the miner money. For incentive compatibility on the user side, we want myopic rationality to bid truthfully, and we'd like prices to stabilize. I'll formalize what I mean by that. That prices will stabilize under certain technical conditions, makes the myopia that we're assuming more plausible. And then we'd like this on-chain computation, so winner validity and price adjustment using only on-chain data. And then the prices should converge for stable demands to be made more precise, and there should be a welfare guarantee at that fixed point. So for the rest of the talk, I'd like to build towards the rule that we introduce, which is the truncated welfare-based rule. And I'd like to do that by going through the utilization-based rule and the welfare-based rule. I'm going to tag the utilization-based rule, EIP 1559, but with the recognition that EIP 1559 also includes the idea of being able to tip and run a first price like auction as well. Okay, so utilization-based pricing rule. Here, Q is representing the price. So the price according to the utilization rule in the next block is a function of the current price. And then very simplistically, here alpha is the conversions parameter, for example, 1/4. Very simplistically, we're going to compare utilization with target utilization and increase or decrease the price according to how we're doing relative to the target. Block utilization is the fraction of the block that is utilized. In EIP 1559, the target utilization is 1/2. And if we were to mimic their rule with this convention, we would set alpha equal to 1/4. One challenge of this utilization-based rule is that it can lead to instability. So here's an example of instability. Suppose there were 50 slots and 100 users, each with value 10. And suppose those users bid truthfully into the rule. I said that this is the way the price update works. What's going to happen here is the utilization is going to swing between completely utilized and not utilized. If the price is too high, then we have 0 utilization, price jumps down, now it's too low, jumps up, etc. And so what happens here is that the price updates according to this kind of zigzag thing. This is, of course, unstable and inefficient as well. So that's an example of instability of a rule that is only utilization-based. So as a way to get more stability, you can think about paying attention to the bids in the rules, not just to how utilized is a block. And that's what this rule is doing. This is a welfare-based pricing rule. So this says, let's set the next price to be something that depends on the previous price and then depends on the average bid price. Remember, bid price can be higher than the posted price. The average bid price of the bids that make their way into the block. That's actually the total welfare according to revealed value divided by the capacity of the block is the way we define this. So notice, for example, that if the block was full, then this price will increase relative to the current price, unless it's the case that everybody was bidding exactly at the posted price. And this has useful stability properties. Let me illustrate that through this example again. So back to the 50 slots 100 user example, first of all, imagine that the posted price is too high. So at the moment, we have 0 welfare in the block, which means that what will happen is that the new price will be smaller than the current price. And eventually, the price will fall below 10. So that's case 1. And then case 2 is, now suppose that the price is smaller than 10. So we're down here. Now, the adjustment rule would take 10 times alpha and kind of blend that with the current price. And if the current price is weakly below 10, then this blend is weakly above the current price. And notice that this price will remain weakly below 10. And that's the advantage that we're getting here from paying attention to the bids rather than just paying attention to the utilization. First, the sequence of prices are monotone increasing, and from monotone convergence, the posted prices here would converge. But there are 2 challenges with using a welfare-based rule. First of all, it's not incentive compatible for miners. Suppose that there's overdemand. As I said earlier, this means that the miner has a lot of revenue optimizing choices. And if there's overdemand, and given the possibility that the miner will be selected again in the future, or there is miner-miner collusion, then it may be useful for the miner to preferentially choose bids with a high value in order to more quickly adjust the price upwards. And the problem with this is this leads in turn to it also not being incentive compatible for users, because now it means that a user with a value above the current price could do better by placing a high bid and gaining more priority within the allocation rule. The second challenge with this welfare-based rule is that it leads to, it can suffer from instability when the values themselves are coming from a distribution with high variance. And so here you see that the price is quite unstable. And so then we get to the third rule. This is the truncated welfare-based rule that we propose. So now, in a little bit more detail, the price update is, if there is under demand, then we will pay attention to the bids. So similar to the welfare-based rule, but we're also going to truncate the amount by which we're willing to pay attention to the bids according to this truncation parameter delta. And this is to make the rule a little bit more stable against a very high variance value distribution than the welfare-based rule. And this is why we give this the name truncated welfare-based. And then in the case where there is overdemand, we're now, as I said, not going to pay attention to the bids. We're just now going to increase the price in a particular way, in a multiplicative way. And so this is going to give us ICM, ICU, OC, and we can also establish welfare, and I'll say a word about that in a second. So first of all, just to show you how, just to illustrate on the same example, how truncation provides more stability to the prices. Now we have, for the Pareto distribution, the posted price converging more readily than it was over here. So to recap, in what we propose, we have an intended allocation, which is the miner should pick a random subset of the bids above the current price. The next price will increase multiplicatively when there's over demand. It will decrease according to prices when there is under demand. And we establish these 4 properties. And in terms of the main theoretical results in the paper, we first of all give a welfare guarantee, which is if we assume that values are drawn IID, then actually, if they converge, all three of the utilization-based, welfare-based, and truncated welfare-based rules will obtain provably a 1/4 approximation to the optimal welfare. So there's a worst-case guarantee there. And then we define asymptotic stability with respect to an IID distribution, which is defined as for any positive initial price Q sub 0, the fixed point of the price dynamic should converge to a value P star, i.e. a price for which the expected value of the next price is also equal to P star. This is our notion of asymptotic stability. And we prove asymptotic stability, first of all, for the welfare-based and the utilization-based rules. In this case, we prove it under properties about the revenue curve. Those of you familiar with auction theory will be familiar with this idea of having a distribution and thinking about as you vary the price, how does the revenue change? So we have a theorem about the convergence of those rules. And then we state an analogous convergence result for the truncated welfare-based rule. I'm not going to give that in technical detail, but I will point you to the paper, for example, proposition 7.3, where we show that it actually has stronger convergence properties than the existing Ethereum proposed utilization-based adjustment rule. So to conclude, and then I think we'll have a few minutes for any Q&A. I think it's interesting to think about using dynamic posted prices as a way to provide predictable payments, and as a way to move away from first price auctions and then get to incentive compatibility for users. Designed carefully, we can find adjustment rules that also retain incentive compatibility for miners. In particular, using observable bids rather than utilization reduces price volatility and increases welfare while still satisfying on-chain computation. And we give conditions for the stability of these pricing rules and for welfare guarantees at equilibrium. And the truncated welfare-based update rule is more stable than the utilization-based rule. And it also satisfies ICM, unlike the welfare-based rule. And then my last slide here to mention future directions. We'd like to formalize the role of money burning in our model. And like to here also point you to this nice paper by Chung and Shi, who essentially have what you can read as a negative result about the ability to get collusion resistance together with incentive alignment. It's interesting, of course, when you think about market design, to think about other types of trade-offs. Should there be larger blocks, for example? There's a fairly large literature on online auctions or dynamic mechanisms where you model explicitly the patience of the users in an economy. It's, I think, interesting to think about whether any of that theory can be brought into the setting. And then lastly, when we're thinking about adjusting dynamic prices, it seems interesting to think about whether we can also try to predict in a more sophisticated way what the clearing price ought to be at any particular moment on any particular day. And you can see that there does seem to be some regularity. This is not from the last month, but this is from September of last year. So with that, I will stop and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Yeah, we already have questions. So Elon, just unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi, David. Very nice talk.
Hi, Elon.
A couple of questions. First question is, both your suggestion and Tim Roughgarden's suggestion seem kind of cavalier about very high values, which is surprising to me coming from auction theorists. Is there is the idea that sort of like, I don't need to worry about allocating to very high values. I can use something like posted pricing because I'm not in a rush and those will be allocated anyway, eventually, like or is it's just sort of like there's no notion of rush. And so that's question number one. And question number two is, in the beginning, you kind of dismissed ascending price auctions as like not feasible. Do we know how to formalize what is feasible in this space?
Thank you. Yeah, those are both really great questions. So value, yeah, I think you're exactly right, of course, to point out that tension, and certainly you're right. When we move to a rationing based on posted price, then we make the market less responsive to the person who has very high value to be transacted immediately. But again, I think then you're right to point to, we have arguably more flexibility here because we are running repeated auctions. We'd like the prices to adjust as well. There's a question as to how quickly will they adjust. And then secondly, there's this question as to how to find the right trade-off between the various desiderata that we may have in mind. And certainly the advantage to moving to something more price-based is you remove considerable complexity in other parts of the system. Now, there could be unintended consequences. There's the challenge, and actually the interesting thing about working in this space, I find, is that there are so many what you might think kind of almost unimaginable things that could happen and that do begin to happen. And so maybe there then begins to be new opportunities for off-chain agreements and things because the price is not dynamic enough, et cetera, and so forth. So I don't think I have anything precise to say in regard to your question, but I think you're asking the right question. And then in regard to ascending price auctions, I don't think I have more to say about that other than I don't see how to bring that dynamic and kind of have the auctioneer follow that dynamic. I don't see without bringing it into the consensus protocol. And so then the question is, how can you bring it? So the first question is that right? Is that not right? The second question is, if that is right, is there then a way to bring it into the consensus protocol without having to bring all of the transactions onto the chain, which of course we don't want to do. But I don't believe anybody has thought carefully about that yet, Ilan. And I think that's a very interesting direction.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. You?
Thank you. This is very interesting, David. I have a question about the updating rule. When you choose that delta where there is full capacity, you increase it proportionally by that delta. How would you pick that delta? It seems like that's a tuning parameter in some sense.
Yeah, that's right. We have a parameter there. We've done some simulations. We didn't work very hard in the simulations. The simulations suggest improved robustness against the distributions we tried them against compared to the other two rules I compared to. But I don't have anything particularly scientific to tell you about how to set that. I think there's some open theory there that we certainly haven't worked on in our paper.
Yeah, I'm thinking you could also make it adaptive too, right? Just depending on the capacity, the utilization or something.
Yes,
might lead to faster.
It feels that it's affecting the responsiveness and yet also the stability. Of course, control theorists wouldn't be surprised about this. If you want the system to be more responsive, then maybe it will become less stable as well. And the main reason we've introduced it is because we observed these instabilities with pure bid-based adjustments.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so David, thank you very much for a very interesting and clearly thought-provoking presentation. I'm going to stop recording now.